Welcome back everyone. In this module, we'll talk about Spring MVC. Now when you create a Spring MVC project, there are two ways of doing it. So in the earlier days, we were having only one way, which was Spring MVC configuration. But now we also got Spring Boot. So the idea of Spring Boot is just to make things easy, okay? So in Spring MVC as well, we can achieve all the thing, but just that we have to do a lot of configuration, and to solve that we have Spring Boot. Okay, but what is Spring MVC? To understand Spring MVC, we have to understand what is MVC, and to understand MVC, we have to understand why we have MVC. So let's go back to the old days. When you talk about normal servlet and JSP, or let's talk about servlet. So whenever a client sends the request to the server, it is server's responsibility to process the request and give it back to the client. But as a client, what a client will get? So of course, client needs two things. The first thing is client needs data. Of course, right, if you go to any website, the first thing you need is data. But you want that data in a well-formatted way. Example, when you go to Facebook. On Facebook, you see data, plus you also see a proper layout. Of course, everyone will get the same layout. So if I go to Facebook and you go to Facebook, we will be seeing the same screen, the same colors, right? What will change is data. So your friend is different from my friend list. Your feeds will be different from my feeds. What will remain common is design, right? So we thought as a servlet, instead of creating everything, because servlet on the server side will create the layout and will create data. Yes, you can do that, but it becomes clumsy. We feel that you should have a separate task, or we should be having separate things for separate tasks. Example, we need someone who will accept the request. We need someone who will give the design, okay? It's like a normal template. So design will remain common. What will change is data. And to hold that data, we want something. So basically, we want something which will accept the request. We want something which will be viewed to the client. And we want something where you will hold the data. So we got a controller who will accept the request, who will send the response. We want a view technology. And then we want a model. So model basically will hold the data. And that's where we got this concept of MVC, Model View Controller. So if you have Model View Controller, it will almost work as the same way as normal servlet without using MVC. But then the advantage would be we are separating the concerns. Okay, we are separating the task. So the controller will only accept the request. In the earlier days, we used to use servlet for controllers and JSP for view, and normal POJOs or normal Java classes for model, right? It's that simple. But we got some issues here. The issues were, whenever a client sends a request goes to a controller, right? And we are assuming that you only have one controller. But what if you have multiple controllers? Oh, that's an issue. So let's say in an application, we have user controller, we have accounts controller, we have laptop controller. We have so many controllers, right? As a website, as a web service, you will provide so many services. How do we create a multiple controllers? Very simple, create multiple servlets. One servlet can handle only one request, or one servlet will be known as a single action controller. Okay, so one servlet can handle only one request. So we wanted something where you can have one class or one controller can handle multiple requests. That's one. Second, we wanted something in front. So we wanted something as a front controller. What I'm saying is, when you send a request, instead of sending that request to the actual controller, first you will send the request to the front controller. Now, based on what request you are sending, it will check and then it will send it to the actual controller. Then now you will think, okay, we have to create a controller, plus we have to also create front controller. Don't worry. The moment you start using framework like Spring, where you have Spring MVC, in Spring MVC, you don't have to create front controller. Spring MVC will give it to you. Of course, the normal controllers, you have to build it. So example, normal controller is your user controller, accounts controller, laptop controller. And this front controller will be your dispatcher servlet. And dispatch servlet will be given by Spring Framework. So now what will happen is, the moment you send a request goes to dispatch servlet. Now let's say you want all the users, you want to fetch all the users. Of course, this can be done using user controller. But who will call user controller? And that's why dispatch servlet says, hey, don't worry, I'm there. So dispatch servlet will send your request to the user controller. But dispatch servlet is something which will be given by Spring Framework, right? So how would dispatch servlet knows that you want to call user controller? And that's where you have to create a file where you will configure all this thing. Oh, now you have to also create the file. It's not that difficult, it's damn easy to work with. But then again, based on what you're using, if you're using normal Spring MVC, then we have to do some sort of configuration. If you're using Spring Boot, this configuration goes down. We'll see that. But we have to configure it. We have to configure your dispatch servlet to call a particular controller. And that's how Spring MVC works. So yes, you can also use normal MVC for servlet JSP, but if you're working on Spring, using Spring MVC will help you in your project. So let's see the practical implementation of Spring MVC. Now, of course, when you talk about Spring MVC as well, we have two options here. We can go with a normal Spring MVC application, or we can go for Spring Boot MVC. Now, of course, there's an advantage of using Spring Boot here. You have to do less configuration. So the way we did with Spring Core, we'll start with Spring Boot now. So we'll try to implement Spring MVC with the help of Spring Boot. And then once you got the gist of it, we can go with the normal configuration. Yes, normal configuration needs more setup, but then we can do that later. So let me create a very simple Spring Boot application, but this time I want to go for Spring MVC. So let's right click here and say new. And of course, right, when you say Spring Boot application, I want to say Spring Starter Project. Now this is where you have to mention group ID here, we'll say Telusko, and have the artifact ID as Spring MVC boot, and of course the package name I will say Telusko.Spring MVC boot. Click on next. Okay, now what to select from here? Now since we are building a web application, you have to say web. Now when you search for web, you can see we have an option of web here. You can select this one. You only need this one if you are going for reactive web. You can just select this one, which uses web flux. Otherwise, if you want to create a web service, you can go for Jersey. But as of now, let's go with web and click on next. We don't need anything else now. We are not working with database or something. Let's click on next. And that's it. Click on finish. The moment you click on finish, it will give you a project. So once you got your Spring Boot project, and you can see we got our project. Okay, still getting downloaded. You can see it takes some time to get it from the internet. So let's wait for it. Okay, so you can see we got our project here, which is demo. I guess I forgot to mention the name for the project. We have assigned the artifact. Now to verify that, we can go to pom.xml, and here you can see we have the artifact ID as Spring MVC boot. Okay, that's great. We forgot to change the name from demo to Spring Boot MVC, but that's fine. You can see we got one dependency which is very important here, which is Spring Boot Starter Web. The moment you add this dependency in your project, this is your Spring MVC now. Yes, with the help of Spring Boot. Now, first of all, why do we create a web application? Of course, there will be a client, and client will send you a request. Now, based on the request, you will process the request, you will generate some data, and you will send it back. That's what we do, right? Okay, but in this scenario, since we have not created anything which will accept the request, normally we call them as controllers. So we have a concept of MVC where we have model view controller. Now it is the responsibility of the controller to accept the request from the client, and then it will do some operation. It will give the data back to the user. Normally we save that data in the model object, and then we have a view which is actually the layout which you want to send to the client. Now that view can be JSP, it can be any other template as well. At the start, at least we'll work only on JSP, and then we can see later. Okay, so we got this demo here. Now what I want to do is I just want to create a controller which will accept the request. Let's say I want to call a home page, and I want to return a JSP. Now, first of all, we don't have a JSP. You can see that I have not created any JSP here. So let's open this SRC, and here in this main, I want one more folder. So normally if you want to keep your JSP pages, you have to keep that in a web app folder. So right click here, we'll say new. I want to create a folder now, and we'll name this folder as web app. Okay, now once you got your folder, we want to create a JSP page. Let me do that quickly. So I will right click here, I will say new. I want to create this, I want to create a JSP file. Click on next. Okay, now let's name this. I will simply call it as index.jsp. That's what makes much more sense, right? And you can see in the web app, we got our JSP. In this JSP, I will say, welcome to Telusko. That's it. I just want to say welcome to Telusko. And so whenever I call a home page, I want to just display this page. But will this work? Okay, we'll try that later. Now, there's one thing you have to observe. The first thing is, we got JSP. That's awesome that we have to put that in web app. Normally, when you create a web application, you always add the Tomcat server in your Eclipse, right? So in fact, this is STS, but you can imagine it as it is your Eclipse. And you can see in the server tab, you can see we don't have any server here. Oh, that means we have to also do the setup. Okay, we'll see that later. But that means if you want to do this application, we need a Tomcat. Otherwise, it will give you error. What if I say you can simply run this application and it will not even ask you for the Tomcat? Let's try. So when you right click on this application and when you say run as, the only thing is you have to run it as a Spring Boot app, not on server, because if you say run on server, it will ask you for the external server. We don't have it. Let's click on Spring Boot app. The moment you do that, you can see it is doing something. It will take some time. So you can see if I jump to console, it says Spring Boot app started. It is doing some processing now. Okay. Now the amazing thing is it says Tomcat started on port number 8080. Now that's weird because we don't have any Tomcat server here, right? From where you are getting it. The amazing thing is if you expand this Maven dependencies here, Spring Boot application has a embedded Tomcat. So you can see we have embedded Tomcat here. The advantage is the moment you move your application to some other server, some other machine, you don't have to configure your own Tomcat. And that's the benefit here. So in the application itself, you have your Tomcat server. So whenever you carry your application, you are also carrying Tomcat server. That's great, right? Okay, so that's something amazing. But how do we access this? Now, of course, it says you have to use the port number, which is 8080. So what I will do is I will open my browser. So that's my browser. I will simply search for localhost :8080. And the moment you say enter, you can see we got something. Okay, we got this error. That's fine. At least we are not getting that weird full page 404 error. We got this 404, but then this is getting returned by the Spring MVC framework. It says there is no error page because we have not built it yet. It shows the timing and there is no message. That's it. At least something is working. We have not got the output. It is not calling index.jsp. But why it is not calling index.jsp? Of course, right? When you send a request, the request goes to the controller. That's how Spring MVC works. So the first request goes to dispatcher servlet, and from dispatcher servlet, it will call a particular controller. We don't have a controller yet. How do we do that? That we'll see in the next video. So let's solve that issue. The issue was we don't have a controller. So let's create one. Now, of course, right, when you say a controller, we are working on Spring frameworks, it should be a Java file. Let's do that. So let's go back here, and here I want to create a controller. Oh, how do we do that? Let's right click here and say new. I want to create Java class. Let's select that. And this will be, of course, you can name anything, right, from ABCD to some logical name. But here I will say, this is my home controller. So logically, when you say you have an application, your application will have multiple services. Let's say you have an accounting service. Let's say you have a user service. You have, let's say, some other service. So when you say you have a user service and you have certain requests which a server will handle, what makes most sense is to have a controller named as user controller. If you're working for accounting, so it should be accounting controller. Now, since we are working with homepage, let's say home controller. And that's it, nothing to specify much here, and click on finish. And that's your controller. Okay, now you will say, hey, this will not work. How can you just simply create a controller and you're getting the normal class is a controller? Kind of, you don't have to extend or implement any interface here. The only thing you have to add to this controller is an annotation, which is add controller. This is what makes it as a controller. Now, as we discussed, your request will first go to dispatcher servlet, and dispatcher servlet will send it to a particular controller. Okay, now, yes, in theory, we have dispatcher servlet needs a configuration file. As of now, you can see we have not created any configuration file, and that's where Spring Boot says, hey, you don't have to worry about the default configuration. I will take care of it. Yes, if you want to provide some extra configuration, that's where you have to use some configuration file. As of now, it will work. So we got a controller. Now this controller, whenever you call this controller, you have to perform certain operation. Oh, when you say operation, that means we need a method. Let's create one. So I will say public, and this method name will be, let's say, home. Of course, you can have a different method name, but that's fine. Let's keep it home. I want to call this method home, which will simply print. As of now, I'm not calling any JSP. Let me just check if this method is getting called when I call the home page. I will say home page requested. That's it. Nothing much, I'm just printing home page requested. Okay, but will this work? Let's restart the application. Let's say restart the application, it will take some time. So let's keep our page ready and let's refresh. And you can see after refreshing, the only thing which changed is the timing. Okay, we have not got the output yet. But of course, the output you will be getting is in the console, right? Because you're saying system.out.println. And if you can see the console, we have nowhere it says homepage requested. That means it's not working. The reason it is not working is, you might be having different kind of request. You're requesting for homepage. You might be requesting for some particular page by saying /accounts or /users or maybe /laptops. Here, I want to specify, hey, whenever the user requests for the homepage, then only you have to call this method. And the way you specify that is with the help of annotation here, which is request mapping. So you have to say request mapping. In bracket, you have to mention the path. First of all, you have to import the package. Let's say control space, package imported. And here you have to say /. So that's our homepage, right? When you say the /. Okay, I guess it will work now. Let's relaunch the application. Okay, so let's refresh it. And you can see, oh, we got a different type of error this time. We got internal server error. We got 500. Okay, we'll talk about that later, what is happening. But let's see the console here. Are we getting homepage requested? And the answer is yes. Can you see that? We got the output. It says homepage requested. That's what we wanted, right? Yes, we got some error. We'll talk about that error in some time, but it says homepage requested. So yes, we got a controller. We got a JSP. The only thing is this controller is not able to call the JSP page. That's what we have to solve now. Now, how do we solve it? When you send a request for the home, okay, so if you check your URL, it says localhost :8080, and then we are saying /. Okay, that's how you request the home page. So this method is getting called. So we have to inform here, whenever you call home method, we have to call index.jsp. Now, if you're coming from servlet background, we used to create a request dispatcher using which we used to call the JSP. Here, we don't have to do all those things. We simply have to return the name of the JSP which you want to call. So you have to say index.jsp. So what happens is, see, who is calling this home controller? It is called by dispatcher servlet. So if dispatcher servlet is calling this method, so it is the job of dispatcher servlet to call the actual page. So we just have to inform, hey, which page you want to call. So we are saying, hey, dispatcher servlet, I want to call index.jsp. That's it. The only thing is we have to say string here. And our job is done. Let's relaunch it. So as you can see, it is relaunched. Let me just open my browser and say refresh. Oh, okay, something happened. You can see, okay, I saw some animation there, something happened. We got the same error, but if I expand this, if you can see the downloads, I just got a download here. Let me just relaunch it again. And you can see we got another download. What is happening? The thing is, okay, so let me just go back again and let me just click on this. I don't know what this file is. It says unknown DMS. I'll just open that in a finder. So as you can see, if I open this, it is my JSP page. Oh, that's weird. I'm downloading the JSP page. What is happening? So let's try to solve this problem in the next video. So the problem is we are not able to run the JSP. We are downloading it. Let's solve this issue in the next video. So what's wrong here? Everything is working except one thing, which is instead of running JSP, you are downloading it. We don't want that. We want to run that JSP on Tomcat. So what happens, when you talk about JSP get converted into servlet and that servlet runs on Tomcat. Here, nothing is happening. We don't have something which will convert your JSP into servlet. Now, if we talk about the external Tomcat, it has that power. The Tomcat which we are using, it normally don't convert JSP into servlet. Okay, in fact, the Spring Boot is famous for REST services. You don't actually create websites in Spring Boot. That was not the main idea. The main idea was to build REST services. If you want to achieve that, if you want to use JSP, yes, we can use ThemeLeaf here, that perfectly works. But if you want to use JSP and if you want to convert JSP into servlet, we need a special library which you have to download, and that is Tomcat Jasper. So let's do that. So let's go to our browser and let's go to the favorite website of us, which is Maven repository. And here we have to search for Tomcat Jasper. So this is what you need. So I will just download this one. Okay, now which version of Tomcat Jasper we need? So let's go back to our application. And here let's open the Maven dependencies. So you can see we have the Tomcat version. It's 9.0.14. So let's stick to that. So let's download the 9.0.14. Let's copy this dependency. I guess it is copied. Let's go back. Where you will add it? Of course, you have to add that in a pom.xml file. So open that. And here, let me add that particular dependency. The moment you say paste and save, it will download Tomcat Jasper from the internet. It will take some time. Now, since I don't have the local copy of it, so you will get the repository from the official website. So as you can see, we got dependency here, we got Tomcat Jasper. Now once you have added that, let's run this application once more and let's see the output. So let's relaunch the application. Okay, let's go to browser and refresh. And now you can see we got the output. So this time we are not downloading it, but we are running the JSP. So that's the thing, if you want to run JSP, you need a Tomcat Jasper library to convert that. So it is working, we got welcome Telusko, our job is done. So whatever we have done till now is very simple. We have created a page which is index.jsp, which is actually our web page, and then we have this home controller where it's a controller basically, and you can have a method which will accept the request for slash, and then it will simply call index.jsp. But what if you want to do something extra? Let's say I want to have a page where user will enter some values. So let's say I want to add 2 numbers. Yes, we can do something big as well, but let's stick to simple because we are learning Spring framework, right? We are not just learning logic here. So let's keep the logic simple and let's focus on the concept. So in the next video, we'll talk about how do we add 2 numbers using Spring MVC. So let's get the application. So of course, if you want to add 2 numbers, after calling the web page, it will, instead of printing welcome with Telusko, will also print the form where a user will enter 2 values. So let's do that quickly. So here I will say create a form for me, and the form will have the action, and I will say the action is add. So I want to call simply add, and then form ends, and here I want to create 2 text fields. So I will say, okay, so that's our first field, and we want 1 more. So I will just copy this and paste. And now you can see we got the second one as well. So we'll simply say second number, and here we'll have it as num2. Now what next? I want to also have a button here, right? Which will, when you click on that, it will call add. Let's do that. So we'll say, okay, that's done. So we got our 2 input text for num1, num2, and we also got buttons. Everything is done. Yes, we don't have a perfect UI here, but it doesn't matter, right? We are learning Spring. So UI doesn't matter at this point. Yes, it matters when you give it to your client. As of now, it should work. Now once you got that page, of course when you click on this button submit, it will call add. But don't you think we don't have anything here which will accept the request for add? Now think about this. What can be done? Of course you need a page where you will show the output. But before showing the output, I want to process that information. So let's say if a user says 2 plus 3, I want to give it 5 as answer. Where do we do that? So of course you need to create a controller. So if you're coming from servlet background, so what we do is we create controllers. But in Spring MVC, you don't have to create a separate class every time. What you can do is you can just add another method. Yes, you can create a new class, named it as calculator controller, in which you can have different methods. But as of now, let's keep it here. So in the same controller, which is home controller, we can have one more method. So we'll do that. I will say public. This will return a string. As of now, let's keep it string. And here I will say the method name as add. Of course, you can have any method name. You don't have to stick with add method name here, and simply return the page you want to call. Of course, right, if you add these 2 numbers, I want to show on some page. In fact, instead of showing it on a page, you can also return this as a data. But we'll see that later. How do we return a data as it is? I want to call a page, and we don't have a page as of now. Let's create one. So I will just simply say copy and paste, and I will name this page as result.jsp. And in this JSP, I don't want the form and stuff. I just want to print the output. Okay, now how do we print the output? So as of now, it's simply saying result is. I'm not printing the actual output because we don't know the actual output. Let's go back here, and in home controller, you will simply say result.jsp. That's it, nothing much. So we have created 2 pages. One is index.jsp and result.jsp. Okay, so this looks fun. Okay, I'm not sure if this is fun. Let me just try. Oh, we're still missing something. How do you know that you want to call this add method for the add request? Of course, it will not match the name. You have to use a request mapping as the annotation. So when you say request mapping in this, you have to say add. So whenever you call add request, it will call add method. It's that simple. So let's run this. So I will just restart the application once. So let's go back to our code and let's refresh once again. So when you say refresh, now you can see not just we got welcome with Telusko, but we also got 2 text field here. Let's say 2 and 3. As of now, we have not done any coding for that. Let's click on submit. Okay, you can see it is actually calling result page. Okay, not in the address bar, because if you see the address bar, we still have num1 equal to 2 and num2 equal to 3. Okay, we are not specifying which page is getting called here, but result.jsp is getting called because we got the output as result is. Okay, that looks cool, but we want to perform the operation, right? So here I want to add those two numbers. Now how will you do it? Now let's go back to our servlet and JSP stuff if you have learned it before. So in servlet, what we do is, if you want to take the input from the user, we use this very special interface which is known as HTTP servlet request. So using that, you can fetch values. So what I will do, I will just go to this add and I will say, hey, I want to use those methods. If you remember, it's not just one parameter, we used to pass two parameters. So in this service method, we used to pass the request object and the response object. We don't have anything here. So we have to create them, right? So let's do that. So I will say HTTP servlet request, and you can say REQ, and we got that object. So we'll say we got this object. Now you'll be thinking, how Spring will know that you want the instance of this interface here? That's the magic of Spring dependencies injection, right? If you remember, we have talked about Spring IOC, or Spring dependency injection, where it will inject the object which you need. Now thankfully, this object is available with Tomcat, so Spring will say, okay, we have that object in Tomcat, let's use it. That's great. Now once you got that object, we can fetch the values now. So I will say int I, where you will have the first variable value. I know it's not a logical name to use, but that's fine. So we'll simply say request dot get parameter. You have to also convert this into integer, right? So you have to say integer.parseInt. Okay, that's how we do it. In fact, for second variable as well, we'll do the same thing. Let's copy this and paste, and this time we'll name it as j, of course, and here I will say num2. Now once you got those two values, you can simply add them, right? How do we add it? It's very simple. You can say int, I will have the variable name as maybe num3. I don't know if it makes sense. I will say I plus j. So the value of I and j will be getting added to give you num3. Now I want to print this num3 because this is my output in the result page. Oh, how will I do that? So we have to send this num3 to the result page, and to do that, it's very simple actually. You can simply say, hey, how do we do that? Okay, so in servlet, we used to use a concept of HTTP session. So when we use HTTP session, we can simply add this num3 in that object, and in the JSP you can fetch it. That's one way. You can also use send dispatch servlet, where you can pass this value here. You can say result.jsp question mark num3 equal to, and whatever value of num3 is, you can say num3 here. That's URL rewriting, right? That's one thing you can do. We have multiple options, right? As of now, what I will do, I will simply say, I will add it in a session. So I will say HTTP session is equal to, let's create the object of it. Oh, but how do we do that? So okay, first of all, we have to say control space. Let's import the package. And here I will say request dot get session. So we have this method which is get session, which will give you object of session. Okay, once you have that, you can simply say session dot, you can add, okay, what's the method name? I forgot the method name. You have to say set attribute, and the attribute name we can have num3. Name can be anything, right? You can change it. The only thing is, whatever name you use here, you have to use the same name in the JSP page. Oh, okay. So I will say num3 in this case. Okay, once you got this attribute num3, we are calling result.jsp. In result.jsp, I just have to say, we can use Java code here, we can use session object and we can fetch the value, or we can use JSTL. So as for the JSTL syntax, we simply have to say dollar and the curly brackets, and here you will say num3. That's it. So whatever name you have in the servlet or in the Java code, need to have it here. Okay, it makes sense, but sometime your JSTL may not work, so maybe your code is ignoring it. So I will simply say is EL ignored false. Sometimes it ignores EL language, which is expression language. Okay, let's keep it, just to be on safe side, I'm saying false. Everything looks cool. I think it will work. Let's restart the application. So let's go back to the page. In fact, I want to call the first page. Let's refresh. In fact, you can see the address is localhost:8080, and then here I will say num1 as 3 and num2 as 4 or 5. So when you click on submit, you want output as 8, and we got it. Can you see that we got the output as 8? So what is happening behind the scene? So when you send a request, the request is getting called for the home page, right? So when you say home page, this method is getting executed, which is calling index.jsp, and that's why we got that page which we have, where we have welcome to Telusko, and then we have a form. When you click on submit, it is calling add. Request is again going to dispatch a servlet, where dispatch servlet sees, hey, for the add we do have a mapping. So this method is getting called. So not just method is getting called, you're also getting the object of request. That's the job of Spring dependency injection. Now once you got the object, using that object you can fetch the values of I and j, where we got 3 and 5, then we are adding them. We are putting that data in a session. Okay, so once you have data in a session, we can fetch it anytime, in fact, provided that session is running. Okay, this is working, but I still have some issues. Don't you think we are not using servlet, we are working with Spring, and this code looks a bit ugly, trust me. It looks ugly. Can we clean it? Can we make it more effective? And the answer is yes, and that we'll see in the next video. Okay, so let's make this code look good. Now first issue is we don't want this HTTP request object here. Don't you think Spring should automatically give you these values in the parameter itself? Okay, what I'm talking about is if I remove this part, I want these two values of int I and j here, int I, comma int j. So we don't need to write these two lines. Okay, so we are reducing the code, right? Oh, okay, I'm just trying it out. I'm not sure will it work. Okay, the second thing is we don't need object of HTTP session here. So yes, we can actually pass it here. So we can say HTTP session. So we don't have to say request.getSession. So our job is done, right? Because if Spring can give you HTTP request object, it will also give you a session object. Yes, it does that. Okay, but will this work? Of course it will not work because you are not sending I and j, you are sending num1 and num2. But how will you assign it here? So we have to use an annotation here which is at requestparam, and here in this requestparam you have to mention whenever you send a value for num1, assign the value for num1 to I. Is that simple? Okay, let me import the package for requestparam, and I guess done. And the same thing has to be done for j. So let me just copy this code and paste it here. Okay, and this will name it as num2. So we got num1 and num2. So value of num1 is going to I, the value of num2 is going to j. So that's how you fetch the value. Okay, this is actually coming from the address bar. We'll see that. And then let's try this. Let's restart the application, refresh the URL, and you can see we got this page. Here I will say 3 and 4. Now you can see this data is going to the server. So let me click on submit. In the address bar, you can see the values of 3 and 4 are going in the URL. So it is fetching from there. And that's how that request param works. That's great. This is working. Yes, you can also use post request here and it will still work. So that's the benefit of using request param. So we are reducing the number of lines we are going for. We don't want request object. We don't need to assign. We don't even have to pass it. That's awesome, right? It is working. But still, we don't want this HTTP session object here. Can we remove that? We'll see that in the next video. Let's try to solve that. Let's remove that HTTP session here. The way you can do that is with the help of a concept known as ModelAndView. Okay, how do we use that? Now, if we talk about model will have data, right? We have discussed that in MVC. So in MVC, model is the data. So your data here is this num3. So we just have to put this num3 in the model object, and we also have to specify the view, right? And the view name is result.jsp. Okay, how do we do that? So we have a inbuilt class ModelAndView, right? We'll say MV, we can have any name, doesn't matter, and we'll say new ModelAndView. Now once you got this object here, instead of using session, we'll add this in a model view. So I will say mv dot, there's an option of add object. You just have to say add object. Which object you want to add? So I want to add num3 as num3 itself. The way you do that with session, right? So we got model object. The amazing thing is you don't even have to return the string format. You can return MV here because MV will not just have the data but also the view name. Oh, we have not assigned that. Let's do that. So I will say mv dot set view name, and the view name is result.jsp. Remember, it is view name because most of the time people make mistakes here. They say they write set view. It's actually set view name. Okay. Let me just remove the extra lines from here. Yeah, so you can see we have added the value, we have assigned that to a model object. It's just that the return type here would be model and view. That's it. But then we don't need this thing here. So we don't need model session object there. Our job is done. Okay, let's try. Let's relaunch the application. So let's go back to the page, and here let's refresh it. It should work. There's nothing which we have done extra. Click on submit and you can see we got 8. So the power of ModelView is it will take two things, the data, which is your num3, so we don't need HTTP session object, and it will also have the view name, so you don't have to return string format. So this works and we are happy whatever we have done till now. Okay, but we have some issues. What if you want to have this page in different folder? What if you don't want to mention .jsp in the code? Because you might want to change your view technology in future. Now you're using JSP, in future you want to use something else. Can we make it dynamic? Let's see that in the next video. So till this point, everything is working, right? We are able to add two numbers as well. So if I say 4 and 5, I click on submit, you got 9. The only thing here is if you look at this code, we are mentioning the extension as well, right? That's something we want to avoid because maybe in future, I might be going for some other view technology, maybe velocity or free marker. In that case, I don't want to mention .jsp here. That's one thing. The second thing is if you look at the pages here, all these pages are there in the web app folder. Now web app folder is actually a public folder, which means anyone can access this page throughout the world. They can simply go to web page and they can mention the website name / the page name. It will not even call the controller. It will directly call the page and it will work. We don't want that, right? We want these pages to be secure. That's one thing. Or maybe you want to keep it somewhere so that no one will know the path. So if you want to make it secured, one of the folder we can use here is WebINF. So you can keep these files in WebINF. They are private. The only way to call them is through the controller. And that's how you can make it private. But what if you want to make it public but in a different folder? That's what we do, right? We put all our pages in different folders. So let's say I will say new and I will create a folder here and the folder name is view or views and I want to put this file inside this view. So if I drag it here, that's done. So we got that into views now. And second thing, I don't want to mention the extension here. So let me remove that and remove this one as well. So you can see the extension is removed and the path is also changed. And after doing that, if you restart the application and if you go back to browser, let's see if that works. Now if I click on submit, you can see we got an error. It says 404. So maybe it is not able to find something, but what is that something? If I go back here, so that something is the page, right? So of course it is not able to find this result.jsp. Now in this case, you have to mention to your framework, hey, we are using Spring Framework and then Spring Framework is using Despair Servlet. So we have to inform Despair Servlet, hey, whenever you are looking for the view, you have to find that in this folder, which is views. And then you have to also add the extension, which is .jsp. Of course, it should be configurable. To configure this, we have a very special file here, which is application.properties. This is where you will do the configuration. But how? Because when you say property files, we have to mention the key and a value. So of course values we know, it will be the path of the JSP, which is views, and the extension, which is JSP. But we don't know the property of it, right? And so normally when you work on the project, you do remember those things. But what if you are doing this for the first time? In that case, you can simply go to this website, which is the first one. If you search for Spring Boot application properties, go to this website, and this is where you will find all the properties. If you can just go down, you can see we have this properties for logging, we have AOP, we have identity, then admin, banners. You can also change the banner, right, using this. What we want is Spring MVC. So if you can just scroll down, so we got Spring MVC, you can see that. And then here, if you want to do that, so if you want to assign the path and the extension, we have to use these two things, the prefix and suffix. Now prefix is what before result, which is the path, and suffix is what after result. Okay, so which result I'm talking about. So if you go back to the code, you can see here we are mentioning result, right? So before that we have to mention views, after that we have to mention extension, and to achieve that we have to put those two properties here. So we can go back there, we can copy these two properties and we can paste it here. Of course we have to change this. So what should be the prefix? So prefix would be views, of course, right? That makes sense. So when you will search for the file now, it will be views / and the file name. We have to also mention the extension. So you have to say .jsp. That's it. Once you have done that, I hope this time this will work. Let's restart the application and let's go back to the browser. And here, if I refresh this and if I click on submit, oh, it's working. Can you see that? So that's how you can achieve this thing, which is removing the extension, which is JSP from the code, from the Java code, and putting that in the property files. The second thing is we have to also change the views. In fact, if you want to make it private, you can also say views belongs to WebINF folder, and that will make it private. So that's how you achieve prefix and suffix. See you in the next video. So till this point, everything is working, right? So we have added these two numbers. In fact, the numbers which I'm talking about is this. So if I pass, let's say 3 and 4, and if I click on submit, you can see we got the output as result is 7. So that's what we wanted. To achieve that, what we are doing is we have created a controller. So whenever you request for home page, it will return the index.jsp. And then when you request for, so in fact in the index.jsp, if you go there, what we are doing is when you click on submit, it is sending a request for add. Oh, so where we are handling it, so you can see in the controller itself, we have add method, which accepts the request for add. And everything is working. You can see it says request param, we've got num1, num2, and things are working. Okay, but there's one thing which we have done in the last video, which is the introduction of ModelAndView. So the reason we went for this is when you want to call a view, of course, right, you want to send some data to a client, and the client will expect a HTML page. So what we are doing is we have created the JSP, which will get converted into HTML after rendering. But then when we say you want to call a JSP also need a data. And data in this case is this num3. So basically we have to set up two things. The first one is the view name, and the second one is the data which you want to pass. So data in this case is there in num3. Okay, so for that we are using this ModelAndView because it can hold two things: model, the data, and the view name, which is result in this case, result.jsp. So what I want to achieve now is, do we have some alternate option? Example, let's say this is best, ModelAndView is best. We can set the name. In fact, there's one more thing about ModelView. You can actually set the view name here itself. So you don't have to use another method. So you can simply pass the view name in the constructor, and that works. Okay, so the point is, can we use something else apart from ModelAndView? Example, let's say I don't want to return ModelView object here. I want to stick to the string part here. Okay, that means in the return, we have to still mention the view name. So I will say result. What I have to change is I don't want to use ModelView. So then the question arises, how will you add the object? That's what we want to do, right? We want to add this data in the model. In that case, if you simply want a model, you can create an object of model and it will still work. But where? So the idea is I want to put this data in the model object. So model is something which will be available for the view as well. So in the parameter, in the bracket itself, you can say, you can specify the reference of model M. Okay, now what this model is? So model is basically an interface which will behave same as model view, except that we don't have a view here. So you can say we are saying model, and here instead of saying mv dot, we will be saying m dot. But you can see we got an error. The thing is, in M we don't have add object method. We have to use another method which is quite similar. You can see the method name is add attribute. So instead of saying add object, we have to say add attribute, and then we can pass the two stuff. The same thing as model view. It's just that we are not specifying the views separately. Now which one to use is depend upon you. You can still go with model, or you can go with model view. It's just that when you send a request, and if you want to have that data in a model, doesn't matter if it will be used for view or not, or you want to call a specific view later, you can still use model. But if you want to specify model view both, I would say preferably you can go with ModelAndView. Okay, you still have a choice. That's great. That's how we can use model here. Now, other than this model, we also have an option of ModelMap. So you can say ModelMap here. Even that works. You can say control space and enter. You can see the code will still work. So let me just run this code, and we'll also see the difference between these two. So let me first run the code with ModelMap. Let me relaunch the application, and it is still launching. So let's refresh, and you can see we got the same page. There is no error. That's great. This time we'll add some different numbers. We'll say 6 and 8. When you click on submit, you got the answer. So you can see we have not done any changes and at the output end. The only change we have done is in the controller. So instead of using ModelAndView, we are using ModelMap. Then what's the difference between model and ModelMap? So if you click on this, you can see this is documentation for ModelMap. ModelMap, as name suggests, supports a feature of map. So by default, when you add the attribute, it will get added in the map format. So you are adding data in a map, which is getting added in the model object. So it depends upon you which one to use. If you want to use simple object, I would say go for model. If you want to add map, if you want to have the data in a map format, of course, the best option for you model and map and model map. Okay, let's go back here. So this still works with model and model map both, at least this code. So try it out. So it will of course work. So that's it from this video where we have talked about model and model map. Now once we have talked about model and model map, it's time to look at another annotation which is ModelAttribute. Now before doing that, I want to make some changes. The first change is instead of adding two numbers, let's do something else. Now in Java, everything is object, right? So if you want to represent data, we represent data in the object format. Example, if you want to represent a laptop, if you want to represent a mobile phone, or maybe account details or user details, everything will become a class and then we instantiate them, right? That's what we do in Java. So here as well, I want to create an object of alien. Okay, now what is alien basically? So alien is a programmer, so I refer programmers as alien. So what I will do here is I will go back here and I will say new. I want to create a model class. So let's say class, and we'll name this class as alien. And the only thing is I just want to make this into a different package. Okay, so here I will say the package is model. It's better to have all your model classes in model package. Now this alien will have certain variables, right? So let's say I want to go only for two variables here. So I will say private int AID and private string a name. Of course, in future we'll add some more attributes once we start talking about advanced concept. As of now, these two are enough. And now I want to have getters and setters for this. I will say source generate getters and setters. Select all and generate. So once we got the class, once we got the variables and getter setters done, let's go back to index.jsp. Now what I want is as a user, you will add your own records. So you'll be having the option of adding the aliens. So of course I want to have the action as add itself, but then the data which you will ask is different. So we'll say enter your ID. So we're asking for the ID, and of course this name will change. I will say this is AID, and then here I will say enter your name. So we're asking for two things, AID and name. Let's have it a name. So you can see we got these two details. So now when you click on submit, it will send the add request. In fact, just to make it more interactive, I will say add alien. It makes much more sense, right? So now when you click on submit, it will call add alien. But in the home controller, you can see we don't have anything as add alien. So we'll modify this and we'll make it alien. In fact, you know what I will do? Instead of changing the existing stuff, let me add another method here and say, okay, let me just say this is, so I will say public string, and the method name would be add alien. Of course, you can go with any method name. And now to call this, I have to map it with a request mapping, right? So I will say request mapping, and here I will say add alien. Now we have to create this method. Now, of course, we have to accept some parameters, right? So the parameter which we are passing from the index.jsp is these two details. We have AID and a name. So whatever we have learned till now is, if you want to accept the values, we have to use this two annotation here. In fact, two variables with two annotations. We have to say request param. So we can accept that with the help of request param. The only thing is here it will say AID, and the variable name is also AID. And here I will say instead of num2 will say a name, and here as well I will say a name. Okay, there's one change. A name is not of type int, it's of type string, so they have to take care of that as well. So that's done. Now this method will return something, right? I want to call a page. I want to call the same result page. I will say result because I'm lazy to create one more page. So let's stick with that. Of course, you can create your own pages later. But as of now, I want to call result. But this result page need to have something, right? I want to print something here. So what I will do is I will not print num3. I will print the object of alien. I want to print alien here. But will this work? Of course, if you go back to home controller, we are calling result that will work, but then it will not print alien because we don't have that object in the model. As you can see, we don't have any model in this method. So the first step is you need a model object. So I will simply give a comma here and I will say model M, so that at least I will be having the model object with me. And in that model object, I want to pass the object of alien. The amazing thing is we don't have the object yet. So let's create one. And the way you create object, you can say alien a equal to new alien. And then here you will say, let's import the package. And here you will say a dot. We have to assign the values as well, right? Whatever is coming from the client. So as a client, you will be sending data, right? So you will say submit by passing, let's say AID as 101 and name as Naveen. So these two details will be received here. I mean, here in these two variables, we have to assign that to the object. So we'll say a dot set a name. I will set a name as a name. In fact, once you got the object, we have to add this object in the model object. So I will say m dot add attribute, and here you will simply add the attribute as a. But if you add the attribute as a, it will not work, because in the result.jsp we are asking for the alien. So the name we have to refer here is alien. So I would say alien. So whatever data is there in a will be represented as alien in the result.jsp. That's what we want. Now will this work? See, till this point we have not done anything extra. It's just that we got a class. In fact, whatever we have done till now, we know about this stuff. Let's relaunch the application just to verify if everything is working. So application has been launched. Let's go back to the page. Let's refresh. So yes, of course, we need to see some changes. Instead of having num1, num2 will be getting ID and name. So I will say the ID is 101 and name is Naveen. I guess I missed something in the code. Let's see that what I've missed. When you click on submit, you can see we are getting the default package name, class name, and the hash code. We don't want this. We want to print the data, right? To achieve that, we do one thing, right? We always we override the toString method. If you remember, in normal core Java, we do that. So I will simply generate a toString method here, which will print data. This is what I missed. Let me just save it and let's relaunch the application again. So when you click on submit here, you can see we got the output. So this is what we wanted, right? So whatever user has entered will be coming here. Now you will say, hey, everything is working. Then what's new here? The thing is, if you look at this code, which is requestparam and requestparam, something is not matching, right? We are accepting individual values and then we are assigning them to the object here. It doesn't look good, right? What I want is, instead of having requestparam here, what if I can simply mention the alien object here itself? This is what we wanted. That means I don't have to mention all this thing. So the moment you pass the object, the moment you pass the values, in AID and a name, now since the names are same, right? It's in AID and a name. Don't you think it should be assigned automatically to the alien object? Is it possible? Yes, and the way you can do that is with the help of ModelAttribute. So once you have ModelAttribute with you, you can directly assign the values here. But how to do that, that we'll see in the next video. So let's make it work. To make it work, we have to use another annotation, which is ModelAttribute. So that means here, instead of all this request param, this stuff, we don't need this AID and a name separately. What I want is, I want to say alien a, right? This is what we wanted, right? And then to achieve that, we don't need this stuff here. We need to remove that. The only thing is, we want this object to be received from the client. To achieve that, we have to use an annotation here, which is @ModelAttribute. That's it. Simply save this, so whatever is coming from the client will be assigned to this A, and our job is done. Let's verify. Let's relaunch the application. So this time I'm sending 102. Let's click on submit, and you can see we got the data. This is what we wanted, right? And the amazing thing is, on the client side, I mean, in the code, we are not using two request param annotation and then checking it one by one, getting the object of alien, nothing like that. It's very simple, right? The amazing thing is, ModelAttribute is also responsible to add the data in the model. That means we don't have to do this manually. Whatever object you got is by default there in the model, and that's why it says ModelAttribute, right? So we don't even need that model object. It's quite simple. Okay, but what if I go back to result, you can see here we are saying alien, right? And here we are saying A. What I will do now is, let's go back here, and here I will say A1. Will this work? So I'm not using alien, I'm not using A, because A is the name of the attribute and alien is the class name itself. Or you can say the decapitalized class name. But here we have a different name. We have A1 as a name. In this case, let's try what will happen. So let's click on submit. The moment you do that, you can see we have not received the data there. The reason is we have a different name here, which is A, and then here we are saying A1. Okay, how do we solve that? So ModelAttribute says, okay, if you want a different name, that's fine. In the bracket, you can mention A1. So now whatever data is coming from this A will be assigned to A1. It's that simple. Let's relaunch. So when you click on submit here, you can see we got the data. So that's the beauty about model attribute. So it's an annotation which also accepts the parameters. So if you pass the parameters, it will take that name. Otherwise, it will take the name of the class, which is alien. Okay, but what if I have alien here? Okay, let's stick to alien. And here in the home controller, what if I don't write model attribute? Will this work? The answer is yes. If you don't have a different name, if you still want to go with alien, you don't have to mention model attribute. But it's a convention that you should write it, otherwise it will still work. But then, there will be a confusion because here we are saying alien, so it is working. What if you change it? What if you say A1, it will not work. So let's relaunch it without using model attribute, it will still work. So when you click on submit, you can see it is still working. So even without model attribute, it works because we are using the same name as alien here. Okay, now this is model attribute which we have used as a parameter to the method. Can we use model attribute at the method level? We'll see that in the next video. So let's say here in the alien, I want one more data. So let me create one more class and I want some data about it. Or maybe not even class. Let's say I want to print the message. Let's say welcome message. I will say welcome back aliens. So I want to print this message. The one way you can do that is by printing as it is, or maybe I want to change this alien to something else. Every time maybe I want to do that in the code. So what we can do is we can say welcome back, and here we'll say name. So by default you can see we don't have any name here, right? So name is just an attribute which we are using here. That means before calling result, I'll have to assign name. Where should I do that? Of course, you will say you have to do that in this method because this is what is calling result. But what if you have multiple methods which is calling result? In this case, you can see even this method is calling result. So of course, we should not be assigning the name here. What you can do is you can create a separate method which is responsible to assign the value to the name. So let's say I will say public void, I will say model data. Of course, you can have any name, doesn't matter. And here you will simply assign the data to the model. Okay, so how do we do that? So we have to use a model M. Now in this model, you can say M dot, and you can say add attribute, of course with the name. So we'll say the name here is name. And then the actual name which I want to pass is aliens. Of course, you can pass anything here, but let me just pass aliens. Now what will happen is, in the code, in the output, I want to welcome back aliens, right? So the name will be replaced by aliens. But will this work? Of course not. If you want to make it work, we have to use an annotation here, which is model attribute. The moment you say model attribute, what will happen is your Spring framework, before calling any request mapping, it will first call model attribute. This model attribute will create a model object, and then in that model object you are adding the attribute which is name with the name aliens. Now it doesn't matter whatever controller you call, whatever method you call with the request mapping, everywhere this name will be available. So in the result page you will get that name, right? So we can use model attribute in the method parameter or on the method level. So let's relaunch it. So let's click on submit here, and you can see we got result is, okay, we have not received the result. I don't know why, what went wrong there, but at least it is working. You can see we got welcome back aliens. So let's figure it out what went wrong there, why we have not received the alien. Okay, because we are saying alien here and the attribute here is A1. That's bad. Let's remove that. I guess that was the issue. Let's save that. Okay, but at least that this is getting right. We are getting welcome back aliens. That is working. Let's relaunch it. Okay, so let's click on submit, and so that is working. We got result is this, so we got this data, and then we also got welcome back aliens. So that's how we can use model attribute on method level. So whatever we have done till now is awesome, right? We have created this project and it works like charm. So we can send data to the server and server will give you the response. The amazing thing is, instead of using normal servlet JSP, we are using a Spring MVC framework. And that too, we are not using normal Spring MVC, we are using Spring Boot here. The reason we are using Spring Boot is, when you work on Spring MVC project or any type of Spring projects, we need to do a lot of configuration. And Spring Boot says, hey, you don't have to worry about the configuration. So if you look at the project, we have not done much of the configuration, we were focusing only on the logic. Yes, we did some configuration in the property file. So if I open that file for you, so you can see this is where we have mentioned that we want to work with this folder views, and then the extension for the page is JSP. Other than that, everything is quite simple, right? We are doing everything in the code. But then before Spring Boot, we should still work on Spring MVC. I mean, a normal Maven project where you have to do a lot of configuration. Until this point, we have not seen that. So what if you are working on a project of Spring MVC, but without Spring Boot? So in this video, let's create a project with the same features. I want to have alien, I want to have homepage. So with the same feature, but with the help of normal Spring MVC configuration. So yes, we will be using Maven here. We have to add dependencies. We have to do some configuration. So what configuration I'm talking about? Now, first of all, when you say Spring Boot project, so this project knows that this is Spring Boot MVC. So whenever you send a request directly goes to dispatcher servlet. But when you create a normal Maven project or normal web project, we have to navigate it. We have to mention, hey, if you want, send your request first to dispatcher servlet. So we have to configure that. Second thing you have to configure is we have to mention that this is a Spring MVC project where all the configuration, I mean all the controller have annotations. Okay, that's we have to mention. Second, we have to do this configuration as well. But then what type of file we'll be using to do this configuration? So in general, when you talk about configuration, one thing come to mind is XML. So we'll be using XML to configure this. Okay, it looks a lot of work, right? And technically, yes, we have to do a lot of work, but it's worth learning. So what I will do is I will go back to my application, go back to the project, and instead of using the same project, I will be creating my own, I'll be creating a new project here. So let me right click here and we'll say new. And of course, in the new project, I will be just copy pasting the existing code to save our time. So here I will create a Maven project. Okay, so not a Spring project or something. Let's create a Maven project. And in this Maven project, so click on next. I want to create a web application. Select that, click on next. So it is asking for the group ID here. So I will say com.telusko. Artifact ID would be Spring MVC. Okay, nothing much specific here. Click on finish. Now, once you click on finish, it will create a project, a simple Maven web project where you have to add dependencies. Okay, so we have to add dependencies first, right? So we'll do that. Or maybe I will simply first copy paste. I want to understand what errors you get. And there's one more issue here. The issue is, yes, it is giving you index.jsp, but unfortunately, it is not giving you an internal Tomcat server. So you have to add the Tomcat server externally. Okay, that is something we are remaining with. So what I will do is I will simply close all this thing code now. And I want to add the external server. So the way you do that is by clicking on this no server available. I want a Apache Tomcat server. And in this, I will select 9.0, click on next. Okay, so it is saying, do you have this setup? Need to check. So browse and let me search for the location of Tomcat. So yes, I have the Tomcat 9 available in my downloads. I will select that and click on open. I don't remember when I've downloaded it. But in case if you don't have the Apache Tomcat, you can just go to Google and search for it. It's not that big deal. And then click on next. Just shift your project here so that you don't have to add the Tomcat in your project manually. So click on finish and that's done. So you have added the external Tomcat to your project. And soon this error will be gone. I don't know why it's not going there. Let me just check once. I will go to properties, code build path. Okay, there are some library issues. It says, what is missing? Something is missing here. The Java folder is missing. Okay, we'll do that. And I just want to make one more change. Instead of having it to 1.5, I will change it to 1.8. Click on finish. Okay, that's done. And I need to create. So you can see it is giving you error because you don't have the Java folder. Okay, even the Tomcat is not set up here. So I will just go here and say add external server. There should be a server option. Add library. I want to add a server runtime. Apache Tomcat. Yes, finish. Click on apply. And error solved. Can you see that? Everything gone. Okay, so once we have solved that issue, I want to copy all this controller. In fact, I will just copy paste the packages here. Of course, I want a different name. We can change them later. So I will just copy that and paste in my main folder or Java folder. Okay, so you can see we got two projects here. And then the change, I don't want the same package name. I want to have a different package name here. So I will say refactor rename. I want the package name to be Spring MVC, not boot. Click on OK. And the same thing here. Okay, done. So once we have done those two changes, it is still giving you error. Okay, can you see that we got error here? Now, first of all, when you talk about Spring MVC, we don't need this main file because this is used only for the Spring Boot. Let's remove that and we are getting error for controller as well. Now, what is the error here? The thing is, whenever you work with Spring Framework, you have to add Spring dependencies, and you can see we don't have it here. Oh, from where you will get it? You guessed it right. We have to add dependency in the pom.xml file. So here we have to add Spring MVC dependency. So save. From where you will get it, just go to the Maven repository, MVN repository, and here you have to search for Spring MVC. And you can see we got Spring Web MVC. Just select that. Okay, which version? I will go with this table one, which is 5.1.4. Click on that and copy this. Just go back to application and paste. Now, once you say paste, it will take some time to download. Okay, it was quick. That's great. Because maybe I've used the same version before. So you can see we got all the dependencies here. The moment you got dependencies, I will go back to home controller, and can you see that? Gone. All the errors gone. Okay, that's working. So what do you think? If I run this application, oh, how can I run this application? Because we don't have the pages. So I want the pages as well. So these two pages, I will just go back here and index. In fact, I want them in views. So let me just copy the entire folder and let me paste inside the web app folder. Okay, so when I say web app, inside this, we already have index.jsp. We don't need it. So I will just right click and say delete. I don't want that folder or the file. So in the view, we have two pages, index.jsp and result.jsp. Okay, this looks cool. What else we can do here? I guess this is the configuration which I wanted. Let me just run this code. So what do you think? If I run this code, will it work? So the answer is no, actually, because the moment you run this application, it will search for the index.jsp. Oh, before that, I have to do one more thing. I want to shut down the internal server which we were using for Spring Boot. Otherwise, it will give you the conflict for 8080 port number. So I will go back here, index.jsp. Let's run this code. Or in fact, I can run the entire project, right? So I will say run on server, because this time we are using external server. Click on next and click on finish. Yes, it takes some time. I guess it will use the internal browser. And can you see that we got error? It is not able to find the index.jsp page. How do we solve it? Yes, we have to do a lot of configuration, but that we'll see in the next video. So it is time to solve the issue. So the issue is we are not getting the page, right? Because the moment you run this application, and when you say you are calling for the home page, it will look for the index.jsp page in the web app folder. As you can see, we don't have it there. That's one issue. The second issue is I want the request should be sent to the controller, not directly to the page. To achieve that, we have to configure our XML file. So now, normally when you create a web application, you get this amazing file here, which is web.xml. And in this, if you go to source, this is where you have to configure that, hey, whenever I send a request, the request should go to dispatcher servlet. If you remember, in Spring MVC, all the requests should go to dispatcher servlet first. Okay, how do we do that? So it's quite simple. You just have to go here in web app. We don't need that. And we need to create a servlet tag. That's how you provide the servlet mapping, right? So we'll say servlet tag, and we also need a servlet mapping. Okay, once we got these two things, in servlet tag, we have to specify two things, as we do in all the servlet projects. The first one is a servlet name. Let me just have the name as Telusko. And we need one more thing, which is your servlet class. Okay, now what is the class? We'll talk about that in some time. But before that, I want to map with this servlet mapping here. Okay, so first of all, when you say servlet mapping, again, we need two things here. We need a servlet name. In this case, you have to make sure that this name is same as this name, because that is how you link these two outer tags here. And then you have to also map with the URL. Now, why do we need URL? So to mention for what type of request you want to call this particular class, which you have not mentioned till now. So I want to call dispatcher servlet for all the requests. So for all, you can simply use slash that. Okay, so but then we have to mention the class name, right? So what is the class name? So as I mentioned, whenever you work with Spring MVC, request should go to dispatcher servlet. Okay, so that's a class. So we'll simply mention that here. So we'll say dispatcher servlet. Oh, it's not coming directly here. Dispatcher servlet declaration. Oh, it's giving you entire stuff. We don't need that. Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome. We don't need to actually create all this thing. It is giving you everything. But let me just type it here, and then we can get it from the control space. I will simply type it here. So it belongs to Spring Framework, org.spring framework.web.servlet.dispatcher servlet. So dispatcher servlet belongs to this particular packet. That's how you map it. In fact, the other way is you can simply, if you don't want to type all this thing by yourself, you can simply say dispatcher servlet. You can see it says you can autocomplete, click on enter. it will give you almost the same thing which we have done here. You see that you can handle. But I would like to go with the same text which I have written. Let's stick to that. Now we are saying request should go to dispatcher servlet. But then it is dispatcher servlet who will send the request to the controller here, right? So how would dispatcher servlet knows that it has to send the request to the controller? And that's where we have to configure the dispatcher servlet as well. Because if we don't do that, it will give you an error. Okay, what error it will give you? Let's see. Let me just shut it down and let's relaunch the application. Run on server. Yes, click on next, finish. Okay, so you can see there's no error as of now, but then the moment you try to call the home page, we got a different error this time. And the error is file not found exception, and the file it is trying to find is telusko-servlet.xml. Oh, that's weird. Why only this file name and what this file will do? Okay, so first of all, this file is responsible to configure your dispatcher servlet. Okay, that's one. Second, why the name is telusko-servlet? So basically the name should be something-servlet. Now what is that something? The name of your servlet name. So since it is Telusko here, and that's why in the error itself it is saying Telusko. That's the reason we got Telusko-servlet. So if you give a different name here, if you say A, it will be a-servlet.xml. Okay, so we have to get that file, but where? In the Web INF. So we'll right click here, we'll say new. Okay, so we need to create a XML file. So select XML here, click on next, and okay, what should be the name? As we discussed, the name should be telusko-servlet.xml. Click on finish, and you can see we got this file here, and here we have to add a bean tag. Instead of typing that, let me just copy paste it. This is where you will specify the DTD for the beans we'll be creating, and we'll say beans. Okay, that's done. We have assigned the beans tag, and now we have to do some configuration. The first thing is we have to mention to the dispatcher servlet where are my controllers. Second, we have to mention, hey, we are using annotation for the controllers. And third is the path. So let's go step by step. The first one is we have to specify the context. We have to specify the package, in fact, the base package. So for that, I'll be using component scan. It is ctx::component scan, and you can see it is asking for the base package. So you just have to mention in which package you have all the controllers. Okay, so in general, I can specify com.telusko. You should be very specific here, but that's fine. They should work. The next thing you have to mention is you have to mention that we are using annotation configuration. So you have to say ctx annotation config. That's it. Okay, will this work? Let's try. So after doing all this configuration, let's try. Let's see what happens. Yes, restart the server. Okay, just calling that page. Oh, this time we got a different error. Okay. Maybe we are running a very wrong file here. Let me just run the application. Yeah, so you can see we got a different error this time. It says something not found. Okay, 404. Now what is not found? It says there's no mapping for get index. Oh, there's no mapping for the index. It's because we are calling the controller. You can see it is calling the controller. It is no mapping for the index. It is there. Okay, it is there. The only thing is it is not able to find the extension and the path. Because if you move this index.jsp to web app, and if you write .jsp here, it will work. But I want to specify the path as well. And to do that, we have to create a bean, and then this bean will have a class. So the class who is responsible to do that is internal resource view resolver. Now this belongs to a particular package which you have to mention. So you have to mention the entire path here. That's bad. Okay, this is the entire path we have to mention, and then we have to close this. That's your bean tag. Now in this bean tag, now this here, which is internal resource view resolver, is responsible to search for the view and to give the extension and to specify the path. And to achieve that, we have to specify two properties. The first one is prefix, as we are talking about prefix. The prefix I want to have is, we'll say value. So they are in the view, right? So we'll say slash views slash. We have to specify the path. The only thing you have to mention now is the extension, and to do that, you guessed it right, we have to use suffix. So we'll just paste it here, and this will be suffix. Okay, the value will change. So the value here will be .jsp. That's it. So whatever you have done in the configuration in Spring Boot, the same thing is done here. We might have to add one more property here for the JSTL. Now, since in our code, we are using JSTL, so let's make it supportive. So I will say property and we'll say view class. So the view class I want to go for is GSTL view. And to achieve that, we'll say org.springframework. So this is the path. So it is org.springframework.web.servlet.view.jstl Okay, I'm tired now. I guess it is done. Let's try. I hope this should work now. Let's relaunch the application. Okay, something worked. Let's go back to the page here and say, hey, I want to call the home page. And now we got another error. It says class not found. JSTL is not there. That means we have to also add the JSTL now. Okay, so let's try this. Let's go back to here. Let's go back here and let me just remove the property for time being. Relaunch, go back here. Okay, it's working without that. Let's try. So you go back here and say 4 is my ID and my name is Naveen. Click on submit. Oh, it is working. Can you see that we got AID4 and name is Naveen. So we got welcome back alien as well. So everything is working, and this time we are using normal MVC. We are not using Spring Boot. So let me just go for a quick recap what we have done till now. So basically we have this home controller, but as we are working with Spring MVC, the first request, in fact we are working with web project, the first request will go to the web.xml. This is where we are saying whenever you send a request will go to Jasper servlet. And to configure that, we have this file which is Telusko-servlet. So this is the configuration for Jasper servlet where you are mentioning two things, the component scan, annotation, and the most important is the view resolver, in which this part is not required. If you want to write that, you have to also add dependency for JSTL. Let's not do that here. And you can see we are specifying prefix as views and suffix as .jsp. And everything is working. It's that simple. So that's it from this video. Now once we have seen how to create a simple Spring MVC application, let's get back to Spring Boot, because that's where we want to learn some more advanced concept. Now this is the project which we were talking about before, right? The demo project, which is Spring Boot application basically. So you can see it also says it's a boot application. So what I want here is I want to have some more features. So before that, let me just run this code once again just to verify what we have here. So I will say run as Spring Boot app. Okay, so let's run this, and you can see it is asking you for two things, the name and the ID. So I will say ID is 101, let's say rows. And if you click on submit, you can see it's working. We got 101, we got rows. It also says welcome back aliens. Okay, what I want now is we are only sending data, and that if you see, the data has been sent using a get method. So normally when you send data from an HTML page to the server, it goes in, you can call it with the help of get method or a post method. So in the get method, you actually pass the data in the URL. Okay, that's something we don't want, because whenever you send data to the server, you should always use post. Whenever you fetch data from a server, you should use get. So here in this scenario, if you look at the pages which we built, the index.jsp here, it is asking you, it is sending the data to the server. So in this case, instead of using get, we should be using post. And the way you can do that is by mentioning method is equal to post. So now you will be sending data in a post format. So let me relaunch the application. So let's get back to the browser, and here you will say refresh. Okay, where is that? Refresh. And now I'll be sending, let's say 101 and rows. And if you click on submit now, you can see in the address bar, we don't have it. We don't have those values. So it is going there with the help of post request. But what is happening on the server side? So if I open my home controller, this method, which is add alien, accepts both the request, the get and the post both. Okay, now the amazing thing is, request mapping does both, right? But then what if you want to support only one? You can do that, you can mention that. So what I will do is I will say, instead of using request mapping, in fact, there is one more way. You can have one more attribute here. So you can say value is equal to the value which you have. And then you can give a comma here by specifying the method. And you can see the method is, so you can mention method equal to request method dot get. Now, when you say get, it will only support get now. So if you send a post request, this will not work. And if you want to use post, just mention dot post. It will only work with post now. So that's how you can restrict. So you can say post or get. You can be very specific in this case. This is one way. The another way of doing that is, instead of using method stuff here, we can actually change this request mapping to, we have one more annotation here which is known as get mapping. Now get mapping is same as request mapping with method get. So it will only work with get now. If you want to use post, we can also use post mapping. So basically we have three things. We can use request mapping, which supports both. We can use get mapping, which only supports get, and we can use post mapping, which supports post. So that's how we can be very specific in this case. So that's how we use get and a post in this scenario. In fact, we'll also use get in the next video. So till this point, we are only using post mapping, right? We were sending data. But what if you want to receive data? So what I'm talking about is, let's say if I go back to the index.jsp, and this is where we have this button which will send data, but I also want a button which will receive data. Okay, or instead of having a button, let's go to URL and say I want to fetch a data. So let's say example, if I go to Safari again, and here instead of having the colon 8080, I will say I want a data about an alien. So I will say get alien. Now when you say get alien, or maybe I can say get aliens, which will give you all the aliens. So I will say get aliens in this case. So this get aliens, oh, it is redirecting to me to Google. We don't want that, but that's fine. So I want to return the alien names, the list of aliens. Of course, I can use static list here. So let's do that. So I will go back to my home controller, and let's create a method which will accept get aliens. In fact, I don't need this add anymore, just to reduce the number of lines we have in the code. So I will go back here and I will say public string, and the method name would be get aliens. Again, as I mentioned, you can use any name, doesn't matter. And we don't want to return string. Do you want to return string? Yeah, let's return a string. So let's return the list of aliens in a string format. And there's one more thing. If I go back to alien, we want to do one more change here. The change is inside this alien, I want a constructor because I don't want to create an object and assign the value using setters getters. Let's use constructor here. So I will say source generate constructor using field, both the fields. Okay, so once we got the constructor, let's go back to the code. Now here I want to create certain aliens. Before that, I just want to return some blank string so that you can just avoid the error. And I want to call this whenever someone requests with a get request, and the URL which I want it to work here is get aliens. So here let's create a list of aliens. So I would say list of aliens. I will say this is aliens equal to, okay, let's import the package for list. I will say control space the list, and here let me create arrays dot as list because I don't want to say new array list. This is shortcut way of creating multiple lists here, and you will say new alien, and let's say 101 comma Naveen. That's the first alien we got. Then we give a comma, and again I will say an alien. We can have one more alien here which is 102, and I will say rows. So you can see we got two aliens. We got a list of two aliens, and let's return this list here. So I will say return aliens dot toString because I'm sending that data in a string format. So we have to convert that into string format. Again, I'm not even converting this into JSON. Okay, my bad, I know. I'm just converting that into a string. Okay, so if this works, let me just relaunch the application. Okay, so it says restarted. Let me just go back to the thing here. Okay, now I want to request for get aliens. So slash get aliens, enter. And oh, we got an error. It says, oh, there's a problem here. Can you see that? If you look at the error properly, it says it is not able to find. So there's a 404 error. It says not able to find view, and we got the answer. You can see that we got a list in the text format, and it is searching for that page.jsp. You know why? Because by default in Spring MVC, whatever string you return, it gets returned in the format of name. Whatever you return, it will be trying to search for the name of it. We don't want that. We want to call a page. So we did that mistake. We should not be returning a list here. We should be returning the page which will display this. So let me just return a page. I will say show aliens. We don't have this page as of now. We need to create one. So let's quickly create a page of JSP. So I will say new, and I want to create a JSP file with a name show aliens.jsp, and here I want to display that result. So I will say $aliens. I want to print aliens here. That's it. Or maybe I will just simply print result because I don't care what we are sending. I just want to print whatever we are sending from the client side. I want to have one more thing. I just want to say is EL ignored, just so that in case if my Tomcat says, hey, I will not be supporting EL, let's do that. So let's say is EL ignored false. Okay, everything looks good now. I hope this time, it will still give you error because we have not added that in a model. Okay, let's do that. So I will say model M, and here I will say model.addAttribute. As I mentioned, you can also use ModelMap here. We discussed that before, right? And I will say this is result and this is aliens. That's it. Let's relaunch the application. So let's go back here and say enter. Can you see that we got the output? So we got the data from the server, and this time we are sending a GET request. So you can see this is your POST request and this is your GET request. So if you want to work with GET, we say GET mapping. Okay, but let me just add one more twist. What if you want to fetch a particular alien, not just all the aliens, you want only one alien, let's say 101 or 102. How can we do that? And that too, I want this data to be coming from database. Oh, we are having so much of restrictions here, right? Okay, so first of all, let's try to get one data and we'll see the database part later. So that we'll see in the next video, how do we fetch one particular data.